Hello everyone and welcome. Hope you're having a good day and a good time. Last week, Blizzard dropped a new PTR. A new test version is online. It is 1.36.1. First time PTR patch for Warcraft 3 in quite some time. Maybe like 3/4 of a year or something like that. Anyways, dropped last week on Thursday, and since then, there's been a lot of discussion going on. In the scene, there are a lot of people voicing their disapproval, and I think I might be one of them. I didn't want to do a balanced feedback video like this right away. I wanted to have a couple of days of time to gather my thoughts, to consider suggestions that I might have, and to hopefully get a good idea and get a good picture of what this patch entails. We're about to jump into the patch notes themselves, but quickly before I do, I want to shortly touch on the structure of this video. It's going to be pretty straightforward. First, we're going to look at the blue notes, as they are called, the post by Blizzard on the Blizzard forums. So their suggestions for the new patch. I'm going to go through the patch, give my opinion on every point, on every suggested change, and what I like, what I don't like, and all that. Gonna go through that first, through the blue post by Blizzard. After that, I'm gonna show a document that I made myself with the suggestions, the changes that I would put forth, that I think would be good for the game. In those changes that I'm gonna show from my document, I'm not gonna involve the changes from Blizzard that I do appreciate, that I would also thumbs up, so to speak. Those I will just mention in the first part when we go through Blizzard's proposed changes. And maybe one word before we get into the thick of things. I appreciate that Blizzard is trying once again to continue to balance the game. It is not easy, especially when you're not very familiar with the top level of competition. And that they're trying to do it right now is commendable. It's always a very fine balancing act when it comes to any game to balance. So I appreciate also that they want to work with the community here, as they have done with PTRs in the past. They want to gather feedback from the community and then make changes. This is what they also did before. They proposed one PTR first, community gave feedback, and then changes were made. One last thing, there's oftentimes a difference of opinion in the gaming community and the game developer community, because the question is also, this patch, this game is going to get patched and going to get changed. Who are these changes for exactly? Sometimes in Twitch chat, for example, I saw people saying, well, okay, but why do we have this change? This only affects the top players in the world. And that's a fair point to make, because of course, 99% of us, basically all us normies, we're not playing on the top level of Warcraft competition. Why is that the one that Blizzard is focusing on, or have been focusing on? I think, despite there being a low number of top level competitors, 2,600 MMR plus 2,500, I think this is the right way to go. I think you have to focus on the top level of play, because, you have to basically, if you're trying to balance the game, you have to select one skill bracket to balance around. And if you have to select one skill bracket, which one is there going to be? Is it going to be the low skill player, the mid skill player, the high skill player, or the world elite? And I think since you have to pick a bracket, I think it has to be the world elite. In some matchups that is more clearly felt than in others. For example, Orc versus Night Elf on the top level, I think is very balanced, very fair. But the lower you go down in skill level, the harder it becomes for Orc, because the execution is just a lot easier for Night Elf. But if an Orc is on the top level, world-class level, then he can match that execution as well and not end up being behind. All right, that just as a little preamble. I think focusing on top-level world elite play is what we have to do moving forward. Also because, competitive Warcraft is and has been the lifeblood of the game for many years, and this is seemingly where the primary focus seems to lie on right now. All right. Sorry for that little impromptu ramble, but now we're going to get into the thick of things and look at the actual proposed patch notes by Blizzard. All right, we start off as always with the humans. We have Militia Duration being buffed again. As you may remember, it went from 40 seconds. It went from 45 seconds to 40 seconds a couple of years ago, which did certainly weaken humans in the early game. Now it's getting buffed again. All right. So what is the consideration here? Obviously, this is a buff for human. It buffs the early game. It buffs human all around, and especially buffs fast expansion play. And I think 1 or 2 years ago, I probably would have agreed with this change. But right now, as the meta stands, and of course you always have to consider the current meta, I don't agree with this. Human at the moment has 1 weak matchup, in my opinion of course. Against Night Elf, the matchup is kind of weak, especially once the Demon Hunter gets strong, once the Bears come in with Rejuve and so on. But this is not a change that only affects the expansion, or only affects the matchup against Night Elf. It affects the expansion in general, but also human as a whole. And this is a buff that I think is not needed. Human is looking good against Undead. Human is looking good against Orc. We must make sure not to buff human too much in general ways to make them too strong in the other matchups. So I think the right way to go here is target human versus Night Elf. Make Night Elf a bit weaker there. Human may be a bit stronger there. But try not to interrupt the state of the other matchups, as again, I think those are very fair. So I disagree with this change. This is an overall buff to human that is not needed. And also, it seems almost a bit unfair, because human is already and has always been the best race at fast expanding. This makes them even better. I'm a big fan of fast expansions. I think that is a very healthy meta if multiple races go for fast expansions, but humans could always do it. They still can. Night Elf can also do it pretty well. Undead can do it pretty well. Only Orc is not really able to do it. But Orc is strong at tier 2 expansions, at least. So I definitely disagree with this change. I think this is too much unneeded help. To be fair, it's not a huge deal, 2.5 seconds. But considering human is in a good spot, I don't think this is needed. Second one, Bash getting buffed on levels 3 and 4. Quite a bit. This is a lot more levels 2 and 3, of course, I mean. This is quite a bit more damage. I wonder where this came from. This kind of comes out of left field. I remember, it was maybe 2 months ago. I saw a clip where Grubby said that since Bash only improved from level 1 to 3, from, 20 to 30 to 40%, it seems like Bash isn't getting much stronger from leveling up. I wonder if somebody saw that clip and felt like, oh, you know what? We should buff Bash. Because this is not a needed change. It's not a terrible change either, but it doesn't really target the problem of the Mountain King. Once you have, this is only going to be relevant for level 4 MK, obviously. Until level 4, or before level 4, on level 3, this will be of no relevance. On level 4, there's going to be a nice buff. And if ever you get Bash level 3 with a level 7 MK, I guess good for you. But yeah, once the MK is level 4, he is strong already. He has overcome the hurdle. This is when the MK is already looking tremendous. So if you want to buff the MK, if you want to do that, you should target the early game for him. This doesn't do that at all. But I would also disagree with buffing the MK early game. MK is super strong against Undead right now, both as a first hero and as a second hero. Same goes against Orc, also very strong as a first and second hero. Against Night Elf, it's difficult because of Demon Hunter, but in the Human Mirror, still we see him a lot as a second hero. So the MK is in a good spot. And here again, I want to come back to the point I made earlier. You have to be aware of the current meta. What is going on right now? What is the state of the game? MK is looking good. MK doesn't need buffs in any way, really. So I also, unfortunately, disagree with this one. Next up, we have a buff to Devotion Aura suggested here, which is one of the most extreme buffs I've seen in a long time. I can understand where Blizzard is coming from, because the Paladin really doesn't see much play, especially not as a first hero, and also almost never as a second hero. Okay, I may have to take that back. With MK first, Pally second, we see him a good amount now. But this is not the right way to buff the Pally. I think if the Pally needs buffs, it's in the way of first hero play. And there, the Devotion Aura buff will help. This will help in every way because it is an enormous buff. Like, Devotion Aura is good already. I talked about this before. This kind of makes me look back to the olden days of Warcraft 3, back in 2009, 2010, you know, before the Renaissance, before we knew a lot of details and mechanics of the game. Back then, everybody sold Rings of Protection. Nobody upgraded armor on their units. Nobody thought armor was good. This changed quite some time ago. We have learned that armor is really good because damage reduction is really good. The aura for the Paladin is already strong. We see this also because the Lionhorn of Stormwind that drops from creep camps is always a really good item. That's 1.5 armor. The suggested change here is 3 armor on level 1. That is 15% damage reduction on the entire army. And if you get to level 4, for the aura level 2, which is very easy with a pally first, it's 6 armor on everything. I'm not exactly sure what the damage reduction number there is. Maybe like 22, 23% or something like that. This is insane. This is insane. It's way, way, way too good. Devotion Aura is a really good aura. It's one of the best auras in the game. It is excellent for fighting. It pairs extremely well because the Paladin can reduce the damage on the army and then heal it, of course, with Holy Light. Holy Light is also extremely strong. This is a buff on a hero that deserves a buff, in my opinion, but way too heavy of a buff and not in the right spot. When I get into my suggestions later, I will talk about a buff for the Pally that I would suggest to especially make him more playable as a first hero. But yeah, this is crazy. Over the last few years, we've been nerfing auras bit by bit because we've noticed that auras are really, really good. I don't know who's doing these patch changes, and I don't want to flame anyone, but it seems like that person has not been paying attention when we noticed that auras are really strong. This is not the right way to go. Following here, we have movement speed nerfs. This is also something I'm very confused by. So, it's not just MK and Pally, it's all the slow heroes in the game being made even slower. And this kind of reverts a change that happened a couple of years ago, back in, reforged Matt Morris days. A lot of changes back then weren't the best, as we may remember, especially from the Keeper. But I think the change to make the slow heroes faster was a very good one, because movement speed is always a very important stat. And the slow movement speed held many heroes back. Making them faster made them way more playable, made it so that more heroes became available and there was more variety in the game. High movement speed can be a big problem if a hero has catch and can just find kill after kill and dominate and suffocate the opponent, like we saw with the Keeper. But especially if a hero doesn't have catch, slow movement speed is a big problem and really holds them back. Speaking of Paladin, I know it's become a bit of a meme by now. Many people know that I am suggesting Pally move speed increase. Paladin move speed here is being proposed to go down. Same for the Mountain King and, like I said, all the other heroes. I think this is a big mistake. To be fair, 10 movement speed is not huge. It's not enormous, but it can be noticeable. It can make the difference when it comes to you running away or chasing for a kill. That move speed can make the necessary difference then in the end. And yeah, I strongly oppose this change. The two things that I always look for in patch notes or, in patches in general, changes coming up is, first of all, we want to make sure that matchups aren't too imbalanced. There, fortunately, we're pretty lucky right now because there's not many imbalanced matchups. Like I said earlier, I think only Night Elf versus Human is really the one imbalanced one, with Night Elf being stronger. Other than that, we're looking pretty good. So what's the next thing you want to look for? Make as many things playable as possible. As many heroes playable as possible. As many units playable as possible. Different strategies, different abilities, different upgrades. If we can increase the pool of variety, so to speak, that's wonderful. And this is a step in the wrong direction. Making heroes slower makes them less playable. If there's a super strong hero that is dominating and we need to cut him down a little bit, reducing the move speed on him might be a good idea. But just across the board, I think is very wrong. I think it's very wrong. All right, that's it for the Blizzard suggested changes for humans so far. Next up, we have Night Elf coming. As I said before, I think Night Elf indeed is a bit too strong against human right now, but here we see an unusual unit being targeted for a nerf. Druid of the Talon, aka Dots, getting nerfed by gold increase. And this can be very noticeable over the course of the game when you make like 20, 30 dots. And I wonder, and I ask again, why? Why, Blizzard? We almost never see talents. Against Undead, we sometimes do in the late game. There they can be very strong, but there's ways to play against them. And, of course, against Orc, we see them sometimes. But, and here again, I must repeat what I said earlier, you have to consider the meta of the time, the meta of the day. Talons are not the problem. Talons are, it almost seems like the easiest strat for Orc to beat nowadays. With Blade Master Harass early, with Raider Walker, and especially Shadowhunter with Serpent Wards, very strong against Talons. Right now the matchup is a bit in flux. We see a lot of different strats. We do indeed see Talons, that's true. We also see Keeper Hunts Expo, that's still a thing, but Night Elves seem to be kind of walking away from that at the moment. And we also see a lot of Demon Hunter, Bears, Keeper with Thorn's Aura. Bears are in general looking very, very strong. But Talons, I think the person who suggested this was looking at the wrong time frame. I don't know which one that was, but in that time frame, they must have thought that Talons are too strong. This is not the case right now. Talons seem to be, in fact, hardly playable. So this is a buff in the wrong place. A nerf in the wrong place. Speaking of a buff in the wrong place, okay, I take that back. Anyways, we have Immolation being nerfed. So this one here, this doesn't matter. This is just how much mana you must have to activate it. This is of no consequence. But this one here is a nerf to the initial mana cost. When you activate Immolation, the activation cost increased from 1 to 5. Immolation has been looking very strong, especially against human. It can be quite devastating in the early game. And like I said, Night Elf, in my opinion, a bit too good against human right now. So I'm tempted to almost say this is good. But on further inspection, I don't think it is good. The Demon Hunter is a problem, especially against human, where you can nullify so many heroes and make so many heroes unplayable, again, taking away from that variety. But the problem for the Demon Hunter is not Immolation. People are getting tricked by the Demon Hunter, are getting tricked by the fiery activation of Immolation. Immolation is not the problem. Mana burn is the problem. The fact that the Demon Hunter can be so strong in the early game with Immolation and be so strong in the late game by disabling heroes with mana burn and having the powerful orb to carry. Mana burn is the issue, not Immolation. Immolation was, of course, definitely too good for quite some time, but it got nerfed, and I think it's a really good spot right now. We see it sometimes, but not always. It's not a necessity. There's different builds you can go for with the demon. Immolation is in a good spot right now. With all the issues that human has in this matchup, Immolation isn't really the one. It's tempting to think that it is, because it can look so strong, but I think the right things to target lie elsewhere. I'm going to talk about them later when I go into my suggestions. Next up, we have big buffs for the Warden. All right, and for the first time, I will say I agree with this one. Blink being buffed quite substantially. 2 seconds less of a cooldown on level 2 and 1.5 seconds less on level 3. I like that they don't go with the old Warden Blink on level 3, which was 1 second, which was insane. I think this is good. And the Warden is hardly playable right now. She's like on the cusp. We see her sometimes, but she seems a bit weak. So small buffs I would like to see on the Warden. So this one is good. But small buffs. Small buffs. If we nudge her a little bit, she should become playable. If we buff her too hard, she might again be suffocating for other playstyles. And these are some crazy buffs right here. Very nice, max damage being increased a lot. So what this means is that when you use Fan of Knives, the targets that you hit, they don't take more damage, but you can hit more targets. So the potential max damage is being increased. And by the way, what I found out when I did the testing, I saw that these numbers are wrong. Blizzard saying that it goes from these amounts to 480, 800, 1200. That is not correct. I checked them out, and this is actually what they are. So in the past, wait, let me, hold on. Let's go to the Warden first. Explain a little bit. All right. This is Liquipedia, by the way. Dear Blizzard person, if you don't know Liquipedia, please use Liquipedia. It's a great database and resource for everything concerning balance and Warcraft and everything. Anyways, Fan of Knives. So the damage per target is still the same on the PTR, but the unit cap is being increased. So it used to be 455 unit cap, which always was a bit weird because level 3 doesn't give more, but whatever. This is what it was. And now Blizzard is increasing it. Instead of 455, the unit cap, it's now 777. Which means that level 1 Fan of Knives goes from 4 targets to 3 targets. Which is a lot more damage, potentially, percentage-wise. So level 1 Fan of Knives, 7 targets, 525 damage. And here you can see this is, whoops, hold on. I'm struggling a bit with my tabs here. Okay, let's just look at this like this. So level 1 Fan is, like I said, this is incorrect. It's not 480, it's 525 max damage. Level 2 is not 800, it's 875. And level 3 is not 1200, but 1330. I think, you know, speaking of small buffs to enable the Warden, I think this is too big. I think this is too much. Okay, and because I imagine some people want to have proof, I will show you proof. Okay. This little test map that I have. So here we have a level 1 Warden, level 1 Fan of Knives. Let's go in. A couple of ghouls here. As you can tell, it is 8 ghouls. We use Fan of Knives. We had 7 targets. You see? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 targets. All of them took exactly 75 damage. Level 1 Fan of Knives. Alright, I'm going to try to go through this one fast so we don't waste too much time. So here we have a level 3 Warden. Again, we have 8 ghouls right here. Fan of Knives. And what do you know? It's 7 targets. They all take exactly that amount of damage. And last one. Level 5 Warden. Fan of Knives. And again, 7 targets. So, big damage increase. Big potential damage increase from the Warden. Alright, wait. Where are we at? Yeah, back to the patch notes. Okay, so this I think is the right vector. Is that how you say that? This is the right slider. That's the one. This is the right slider to touch, but this is too much. So the suggestion is to increase the targets for Fan of Knives from 455 to 777. How about we go from 455 to 566? That's a little buff. That helps a little bit, but doesn't go too crazy. That would be my suggestion. Go from 455 to 566. That, along with a blink, are 2 nice little buffs that help the Warden and don't look that crazy. All right, next up, coming here for Undead. All right, this I agree with. Spike Carapace being buffed, both the damage turn and the armor. No need to talk about this for a long time. Spike Carapace is absolutely terrible. Actually, having it in a fight is nice, but the fact that it takes up a skill slot, an ability slot, and it's only benefiting you is very weak. So yes, this can be buffed. This could be buffed even more, but yes, this is good. I agree with this. All right. Now, next up, this is the most dangerous of all the changes, I would say, in these patch notes. Is it the most dangerous? There's a couple of dangerous ones in there. Devotion Aura, this one, Fan of Knives, and maybe even Spirit Walkers. But yeah, this is dangerous. I understand that Blizzard want to touch the Necromancer, buff him in a way to make him playable, because the Necromancer might indeed be the least played and least playable unit in all of Warcraft. The danger here is the Necro, if we buff Raise Dead too much, then the mass Necro, mass Skelly, all-in push might become meta. Because right now, this is the only way that Necro can work. You make an expansion, you tech up, you make wagons, you make Necros, and then you bring it all to your opponent's base, their expansion or their main, whatever. 70 supply, roughly speaking. You summon all the corpses, you summon all the Skellies, you walk in, A-click, 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 and then you hope for the best. You either win the game right there, or you lose the game right there. It is insanely binary, it is not at all dynamic, it is really boring. Necro meta would be terrible. So I'm very afraid of this change. Raise Dead should not be touched, in my opinion. It is an initiate ability, and it's insanely weak, but I think it has to be weak, because it has so much negative potential. Cripple buff, I'm kind of okay with. Unholy Frenzy buff, I would be kind of okay with. But Raise Dead, I'm very much against. Skeletal Mastery, cost being reduced, that again goes with mass Skellies. This is something that I do not agree with, and I'm very worried if this goes through, if we're just going to see expansion into mass Necros. It would be a breath of fresh air, but it could be terrible. Next up, Narrow Tower nerf. Alright, seems like somebody is listening to the Warcraft community, because lots of people have been begging for a Narrow Tower nerf for a long time, and indeed, Narrow Tower is very strong. But we also have to consider what the unit, or, you know, the strength gets translated into, what it's good for. And what it's good for, mainly, is protect the expansion. It also protects the main base, but that one is very sturdy for Undead normally anyways. It protects the expansion, I think, at the moment, most importantly. And if we nerf the Narrow Tower, after the Haunted Goldmine was already nerfed last patch or 2 patches ago, this could make Undead fast expansion again very weak. And this could again mean that Undead only plays one base, only plays tier 3 timings, only makes them play in a very binary way. Over the last couple of years, we have found out how good it is for the game, how good it is for the meta, if we allow and encourage more expansion play. 3 out of 4 races can now expand well on tier 1, only the Orc not being able to, but Orc can expand well on tier 2 and maybe even tier 3. And more tier 2, really. Expansion play is good. Good for the game, good for the viewers, good for entertainment, good all around. Nerfing expo play, dangerous. This might again mean that we will only see one base play, which is way, way less interesting. For that reason, also, I disagree with this change. And like I pointed out earlier, I disagree with all the movement speed nerfs, as that will again make these heroes less playable, especially Cryptlord and Dreadlord. Hardly playable already. And the Lich will still be played. Lich must be played. Somebody has to carry the orb. Alright, moving on. Orc. Oh, I noticed they changed, notice this now. They changed the order in which the races show up. Ever since Warcraft 3 came out, when they ordered the races, it was always human first, then Orc, then Night Elf, then Undead. Very irrelevant, but it's just a little quirky to me. Alright, anyways, last race, Orc. This is, I think, my favorite change of the patch notes. This is very, very good. It's a huge buff to Bladestorm, but a buff that it definitely needs. Of course, Bladestorm is very rarely seen. It's a bit of fun fireworks at the end of the game sometimes, but level 6 Blade Master is almost never achieved. But if you get it, and you see Bladestorm, it's always been looking pretty bad. You know, 100 damage per second, it sounds good. But when you see it in game, it's kind of bad. it's kind of not impressive. Especially because, of course, the opponent can just micro away from it, spread out, and then you hit almost nothing with the Blade Storm. This is a chunky buff that I really like. This is excellent. Next up, Spirit Walkers being buffed heavily. And this, I don't quite understand why exactly, but I have a suspicion. Spirit Walkers, for quite some time, indeed, they weren't played that much, with Shaman almost always being the preferred choice, but nowadays, Orc is mixing them in. We see them especially against Night Elf a ton. We see them also against Human in the right game, and in Mirror, obviously, a ton. Not very much against Undead, because of Destroyers. But Spirit Walkers are being enabled way, way faster. And this is, I presume, my suspicion is, Blizzard here thinks, okay, Talons are too good. What do Orc have against Talons? Walkers. Give them more Walkers, make them more easily available. There we go, problem solved. But like I said earlier, Talons are not a problem. They are not. For 1500 MMR players, they are. And many of us are, where all of us are not Lin. But like I said earlier, the World Elite level is the most important level. And unfortunately here, we have to sacrifice the lower level Orcs, as also many of us must be sacrificed on the balance table. Which is a long form of saying Talons aren't a problem. On the top level, Talons are not a problem. Walkers don't need buffs. If there's a unit that needs a buff, it's one that's very close to the Walker. It also comes from the same building. It's the Taurens. Tier 3 Taurens are absolute garbage. Trash. Worthless. The Walkers are good. Walkers are strong units if you have the time to get to them, if you find the window and the right strat to play them. Walkers have great Dispel. Disenchant is the best Dispel in the game. Well, at least, the AoE and the effect is amazing, but it's expensive. So, it's expensive, but it's really good. Spirit Link can be an amazing ability, and perhaps most importantly, for being a caster unit, the Walkers have really good damage. They have more than 20 magic damage, I think it is, which is way more than all the other casters. Walkers are decent units, unlike the Taurens. And also, this kind of goes against the unit design that Orc has. Orc has 2 sources of Dispel, which is really cool. Depending on the situation, you can choose them. The Shaman come out really quick. You have the Purge ready right away if you need it, but they're not as fast. They're not as strong, I mean. Shaman come out, fast Purge, but they're frail, easily killed. They don't do much damage. You have to be careful with them. The Walkers, yes, they take longer. Yes, you don't get to spell for quite some time. And yes, they have their drawbacks, but they're going to be strong later. By reducing this time, you narrow the gap between Shaman and Walkers, and you... what's the right word? You homogenize the casters, sort of. The Walkers being so quick then. If the Walkers come out so fast, and you get Dispelled so quickly, what's even the point of going Shaman? Why? I disagree with this change a lot. Just game design-wise, and also current balance-wise. This is not the right way to go, in my opinion. All right, armor upgrades and melee and range weapon upgrades, all that stuff. Lumber being reduced just by a bit. That's okay. This is not much at all in the grand scheme of things. Orc can sometimes feel quite lumber-starved. When they're on tier 2, they oftentimes have endless lumber if they don't expand. It's kind of weird. I suppose this would be a tiny buff to Orc. But, yeah. This would be okay. This is not a big deal. Does Orc need any other changes? Do they have any balance issues at the moment? I'll get to that later when I get to my own patch suggestions. Interestingly, by the way, just to look a bit ahead towards it, I saw that when I was discussing with Twitch chat a bit, a lot of people seem to think that Orc is looking very weak in many different matchups right now, which I don't agree with. I think Farseer Headhunters has been over-nerfed, unfortunately. First it was too strong, now it is too weak. We didn't find the golden balance in the middle. But other than that, I don't think Orc is looking weak in any matchup, to be honest. That's my view. Anyways, but yeah, I'm going to get to my suggestions later. Soon, because we're almost done here with the blue post. Next up, we have neutral heroes being changed, but this is not really a big change. This is just, again, all the slow heroes are made even slower. Move speed reduction, like I said. I disagree with this change. And then, out of left field, suddenly, we have some unexpected, weird item changes as well. First one, the Circlet, a couple of patches ago, was removed from the level 2 item table to the level 3 item table. So level 2 item table is Claws +4 and Ring +4 and Gloves of Haste. And it was removed there and put to the higher item table with Pendant of Energy, Ring of Regen, all that. That was a great change. That was a great change. Circlet was too good for that drop table. Circlet fit really well into the level 3 item drop table. And when I saw this change, it kind of made me mad. I think especially early game items, you really want to have well balanced because they can influence a game and influence the balance between the two players very quickly just from RNG. Of course, it's Warcraft 3. We want to have some RNG in it. Makes things exciting, makes them unpredictable at times. But early game drops, which are so easy to get and so early into the game, you can get them. You really want to have them nailed down. You want to have them balanced well. And it took us 20 years to get this loot table properly balanced. Claws of Attack +4 used to be Claws of Attack +6. Way too good. Also, Circlet was in this drop pool. Way too good. Ring of Protection +4 used to be Ring of Protection +2. Was absolutely terrible. Only well-balanced item back there in that pool was the Gloves of Haste. Gloves of Haste is still the same. Gloves of Haste is still decent. And these items from these small creep camps, early game creep camps, should be decent, not great. Circlet is too good. Leave it in the level 3 drop pool, please. Maybe the thought is that in the level 2 loot table, there's only 3 items, which is the case right now. Gloves, Ring +4, Claws +4. Only these 3 items. And I agree that that is kind of boring. That's a little bit dull. I would also like to see this item drop table expanded to have 1 or 2 more items there that can drop. But Circlet is not the right fit. Again, I say, Circlet is too good. It would be way better to leave the Circlet in the drop table for level 3 items and introduce 2 new items. This is something Blizzard has apparently been doing lately. We have new items being introduced with the Ring of the Archmagi. And also the Rusty Mining Pick, which is getting suggested. So, as you may be able to tell, later on in my suggestions, I'm going to suggest other items that we could add to this drop pool and leave the Circlet where it belongs with the level 3 items. All right, next up, this is one of the most confusing, perhaps, of all the changes. Tome of Retraining now has a stock of 2 charges in the shop. So, like Boots of Speed, in the past there was only 1 in the shop, now there's 2. That's better, because otherwise one player gets the boost, the other doesn't, and then it's kind of stupid. But, as you guys know, I see a lot of Warcraft games. I watch and cast a lot of Warcraft games. And I think among the thousands of games, I have not once seen a Tome of Retraining being needed by both players at the same time. This seems so entirely unnecessary, it really confuses me. I don't understand why. To be fair, this is a change also that wouldn't hurt. If it's in the game, fine, then it's in the game. But it is not needed in the slightest. So yeah, this confuses me. Although it also shows that Blizzard is thinking of the possibility of increasing stocks of items in the shop. And then, you must just ask yourself another question. Why aren't we increasing the Staff of Teleportation to 2 charges then? Because that is kind of wonky. That is kind of weird in the early game that we see oftentimes nowadays in Warcraft. When both players want to get the tele staff, but one gets there first to the shop, or even worse, both are standing at the shop, both are spamming the key, and, one player gets it. Either by random, by luck, or by the faster ping. And that is dumb. So, if you want to give 2 charges to something, then please, Staff Teleportation would be very good. 2 charges on that should be way more fair for the players in the game. All right. Lastly, we have the Rusty Mining Pick. being suggested. It's an item from the campaign, if I remember right. And they want to add it to the level 3 item drop pool where the circlet was supposed to be removed. And it's an item that gives 1 damage and 15% chance to bash. Bash can decide games. Bash can be unfair. Bash can kill your hero out of nowhere when it really shouldn't. Bash on the MK can sometimes look a little bit imbalanced and, like I said, unfair. But there's a way to play around the bash. You know the MK has bash. You see him on level 2, 3, 4, whatever. And then you can move against it. The MK is a melee hero. If you really want, you can counterplay the bash by having your important units away from the Mountain King. In the right situation. This item works on ranged heroes. Imagine a lich with double gloves of haste, pickaxe, bashing your hero every 3 or 4 seconds, constantly. And he's ranged, you can't really get away from him. There's no counterplay available. Want to make it even better? How about a Blade Master with 2 slippers and gloves of haste? He's attacking almost twice per second. Attacking almost twice per second with a bash chance. This is a crazy suggestion. Oh, by the way, you know what we also found out from testing? That bash stacks. So you can have multiple items stacked on one hero, and then the bash chance increases. Bash is good on the MK because he's a melee hero. Also, he doesn't have fast move speed unless he buys boots to get close to you to use bash. He's melee, and he doesn't have very high attack speed. If you are ranged, or you have a high attack speed, or you're both, bash is crazy OP. This cannot be added. This is insane. This is just unprecedented levels of frustration being invited into the game. I also want to say I commend Blizzard for trying to add new items into the game. I think Ring of the Archmagi, for example, was an interesting addition. There's much more room in the game and perhaps more development space for new items. But not this one. This is not Hearthstone, okay? We don't want that much RNG, please. Like I said earlier, I would have some suggestions for other items that we'll get to later. Also, there's some map pool changes, but we don't really care about that because we have War 3 champions. Okay, that was the first part of this video. How long we in? 40 minutes? Oh, that's okay. Second part is going to be my own suggestions. So, as you may remember, I said a couple of the changes I do like, but most of them, I have to say, I do fervently disagree with. Which were the good ones? Warden Blink is good. Fan of Knives is a good idea, but too much. Spiked Carapace is good. Bladestorm is very good. I really, really hope Bladestorm makes it in. And Tome of Retraining is okay. But recap is, I disagree with most of the changes, and I strongly disagree with quite a few. Blizzard, I hope you are gathering feedback. Of course, my feedback isn't the only one that matters. I'm sure that many will voice their opinion, as they should. But yeah, that was it so far. My opinion on Blizzard's proposed changes. Next up, we have my little document that I made. PTR version 1.36.1 feedback from Remo Demo, yours truly. And these are my suggestions, along with the things that I already mentioned before that I would like to see, you know, like Bladestorm and stuff. These are the suggestions that I would add. These are the changes that I would recommend. All right, I'm going to start with human here. And of course, most important to consider when making changes is the matchups. And are there any imbalanced matchups? And like I said now, plenty of times, I think Night Elf versus Human is Night Elf favored right now. So if you could target a little something against Night Elf, that would be good. First off, I think the Blood Mage deserves some buffs. We see the Blood Mage played sometimes, but it always looks a bit weak. I would love to see more play on the Blood Mage, especially as a first hero. Blood Mage seems to be very hard to make work as a second hero, although we do see it sometimes. Honestly, the Blood Mage actually we see as first, second, and third hero a little bit, but not much. So just to give the Blood Mage a bit more beef, make him a little tiny bit more tanky, because he can be kind of frail, I would like to see the base strength being increased by 1. That is 25 HP bonus, which is not a big deal, but it's a little tiny help. Secondly, Siphon Mana is the key spell for Blood Mage. Sometimes we see Blood Mage with Banish. That seems to be the majority right now. Sometimes we see Blood Mage with Siphon and Flame Strike. But you always need Siphon. Siphon is the key spell on the Blood Mage. The mana steal can be pretty strong though, and some players also feel that it's pretty frustrating to play against if you get slowed and Siphon and stuff. I feel like there's always counterplay to Siphon, but anyways, that's the opinion of some players. The real problem, in my eyes, with Siphon is when there's no targets for you to Siphon anymore, what do? It seems pretty ineffective. And also when you try to Siphon a hero that is running at you, like a Demon Hunter, for example, and he's dealing damage to you, right-clicking you, you oftentimes have to run away. The main idea here is that Siphon, I think, would be good if it also had an effect if you target something that doesn't have mana. Hold on. I just realized something. Yeah, when the opponent doesn't have mana, it stops, actually. Okay. Then that point of mine is not very accurate, because when the opponent doesn't have mana, the Siphon stops. But still, I think giving it a damage modifier would be good, to especially when an enemy hero is charging at you and it's only level 1 Siphon specifically. Sometimes they just tank the mana burn and they can still run in with right clicks. Especially the Demon Hunter here comes to mind. So my suggestion is, when you use Siphon, the target that you put it on receives a 35% damage, base damage decrease, kind of like Howl of Terror. And when you target an ally, it receives a 35% damage increase. Decrease on enemies, increase on allies. I think it doesn't solve all the problems of the Blood Mage, but it's a little buff with which you can target specific units, use it strategically to help the hero and improve him a bit. Lastly, I would love to see, and I think this would be such a nice quality of life change, I would love to see Banished being changed so that when you banish an ally, the movement speed isn't slowed anymore. As you guys know, you use Banish, the unit is ethereal, you can't attack it anymore unless with magic damage, but it takes more spell damage and it also receives more healing. But the problem is, when you try to banish your own units, to save them, for example, or to get them out of ensnares, they're also slowed. Slowing your opponents, if you banish them, doesn't make sense. That would be reasonable. That would be of help. But I would love to see your own units not being slowed down, the movement speed not being reduced, which would also make Banish Micro a lot more satisfying, I think, to play, and a lot less clunky to play. Alright, next up, a small buff to the Arcane Tower. We've all seen tons of games where humans try to expand, try to get up an Arcane Tower, but here comes the Lich, here come the Ghouls, here comes the Headhunters, here comes the Wolves, here comes Demon Hunter Archers, and the Arcane doesn't make it up, and all the peasants die, the expansion is cancelled, and the game is over. I think human, honestly, is looking in a pretty strong position in the meta right now, except against Night Elf. So this would be a small buff overall, but I think it's small enough that it is tenable, and would, I think, especially help with humans' frustration a lot. Next up, Call to Arms on peasants. I would like to see the range increased by 100. This might be a bit confusing, what I mean by this, but as you know, when you use Call to Arms on peasants to morph them into militia, they have to walk to the town hall or castle or whatever, and then they get to it in melee range, they pick up the weapon, and then they can go. If this range to pick up the weapon would be increased by 100, so that it's still very close, it's almost melee range, but you can be a little bit further away. I think this would be a great quality of life change that would also help with peasant and militia micro in the main base. Next up, this is yeah, this has almost become an obsession of mine. I think the Paladin has great potential to increase the variety, the diversity of play for the entire human race, make new strategies available. But the problem is, he's very weak in the early game, which has one reason. His move speed is too low. The abilities for the Paladin are amazing. Holy Light, best healing in the game probably. Devotion Aura, one of the best auras in the game. Divine Shield in the right situation can also be really good, but the move speed is very low. And especially when it comes to first heroes, move speed is really, really important to be able to get away when needed and to chase for kills when needed. So I would love to see the Paladin move speed being increased. I do realize, and I will concede this point, that it doesn't really fit the Paladin fantasy. The Paladin is kind of like, this holy warrior. He is strong, he is bestowed by the grace of God or whatever. But he's supposed to be kind of slow, kind of like a tank, I suppose. But here, I think flavor and theme is not important enough. I think it's more important to make the Paladin playable, increase his move speed, even if it doesn't suit the Paladin fantasy so much. I think this would enable so many human strategies that would be worth checking out. And lastly, I would also suggest the Griffin build time to be decreased by 5 seconds, so a small buff to the Griffins. Griffins are kind of playable, a little bit, but we see them very, very rarely. And like I said earlier at the beginning of this video, my priority with these patch changes, with these suggestions, will be, first of all, help imbalanced matchups, and secondly, make the things that are unplayable more playable. Which is why I'm not trying to change the Mountain King here, because the MK is seeing lots of play. Of course, AM is seeing lots of play, but I think Blood Mage and Pally could use a bit of a buff. All right, moving on. Orc as the second race, in my opinion, has no problematic matchups. Seems like some people disagree with me there. But yeah, that's just what I'm observing at the moment. Like I said earlier, I do agree that Farseer Headhunters was nerfed a lot. And I think it was over-nerfed. Especially the Farseer nerf on the Wolves, I think, was not really necessary. And hitting the Orcs there on the double axis, both Farseer and Headhunters, made the Farseer Headhunter strat especially look pretty weak as of late. We still see it against Human, actually, quite a bit. But in most other matchups, especially in Orc Mirror, it has completely vanished. And also seemingly against Undead. So I suggest to buff the Farseer again. I think the Headhunters are in an okay spot. I think the Farseer, though, is looking pretty weak at the moment. Chain Lightning, for that reason, I would suggest getting buffed. Of course, we could also try to revert the Wolf changes. But honestly, level 1 Wolves are still really good for harassing. 85 mana, of course, nowadays, more expensive. But still very good in the early game. Farseer is still a great level 1 hero. And when you get Farseer level 3 in a timely manner, that level 3 power spike with the Wolves can also be really strong. So I think Wolves actually aren't really weak at the moment. Of course, they're more expensive, but they're still pretty good if you use them at the right time in the right spot. But Chain Lightning, of course, it was buffed in the past. The mana was already reduced. I think it could be reduced even more to be going from 110 mana to 100 mana. And of course, there's this big elephant in the room. It seems like sometimes the Farseer only has 2 spells. Only Chain Lightning and Wolves, of course. But there's also Farsight. And Farsight is kind of a meme. Farsight just, it reveals a point of the map. You can do it every 30 seconds. It seems just trash. So my suggestion would be to give Farsight not just the ability to reveal something, but also to give it some combat power at least. To give the Farseer a buff when you use Farsight of increasing the intelligence by 5, 10, 15 on levels 1, 2, 3. These are numbers that could be tweaked. Should it be more int? Should it be less int? Should it be more than 16 seconds? Should it be less than 16 seconds? This just seems like kind of worth a skill point to me. You, of course, have to consider, what do you give up for this? Well, you would give up Chain Lightning or Wolves, both of which can be really strong spells at the time. This would be bonus damage. This would be bonus mana if you use it. But yeah, it would not have perhaps the same impact as the other 2 spells. Is there something else I want to say about this? Yeah, I think this one also fits kind of nicely thematically. Like I said earlier about the Paladin, I think thematic accuracy isn't always what matters most. More so balance, more so strategic variety. But if it fits, if it happens to fit, I think it's nice. Farsight, of course, for the Farseer is about looking into the future and seeing what is to come, having a vision of sorts. And if that also makes you smarter, if that increases your intelligence, I think that fits nicely. Also, I think it would be good if Farsight applied a Dust of Appearance debuff on the targets in the area, because it's always weird when you use Farsight to see an archer or something, and then Farsight wears off, and then you don't see her anymore. You have to wait 30 seconds for Farsight to be ready again. So I think this would also be a nice little buff for Farsight, which is the worst ability in the game. I take back Spike Carapace. Spike Carapace is the second worst ability in the game. Farsight is the worst. And something that Twitch chat suggested to me like last year, I think was a really cool idea. But I didn't write it down here because I think it's probably impossible to implement. But if it is possible, that would be amazing. And that is, if you use Farsight on a creep camp or on any creeps, that you see, if you could then see what item they are going to drop, which would fit so beautifully thematically with the Farseer, using his wisdom to see the future, so to speak. And then it's also going to be relevant strategy-wise. You could fashion your strategy around that if you know what items are dropping where. But yeah, I think that's probably either extremely hard or impossible to implement. So I doubt that that's doable. But if it was, it would be super cool. All right, again, the trend here continues of making unplayable things more playable, which is why I suggest increasing the damage of Burning Oil. It is really weak at the moment. It's like the only tier 3... okay, I guess Night Elf doesn't have a tier 3 siege unit. Well, they have Chims. Anyways, Demolishers are pretty weak. Burning Oil is super weak, so I suggest increasing the damage. Like, it's medium damage and... full damage and medium damage. This means the full damage of the AoE circle and the medium damage of the outer AoE circle increase, and also increasing the damage, the time over which it deals damage, just to buff Burning Oil all around might make it more playable. Also, I suggest buffing Orb of Lightning. Orb of Lightning is an okay orb. It's very expensive, but if you can use it to catch targets with Purge and to hunt them down and to lock them down, it's really good. But it's kind of stupid that the Orb of Lightning, its intended effect is to purge, so to slow down and also to dispel. And the dispel side of things is so weak. 150 dispel, this is tier 3. Orb of Lightning. This is late game. 150 dispel in the late game on a single target summon is ridiculously weak. So I think this deserves a huge buff. Literally doubling. We literally doubled it, like Jay Wilson. Literally doubling the amount here, I think, is proper. 150 on a single target is just laughably weak. And lastly, one of my favorite units that unfortunately we never see, the Taurens, I also suggest buffing. Taurens and Necros are the worst units in the game. Absolutely trash, really unplayable. They're hard to get to. Orc seems to be the race that has the toughest time finding a proper tier 3 transition. And Taurens, while they could be great tanks in theory, they also have difficulty with healing and, lots of issues. Taurens, though, even if the units are bad, there's another slider you can touch, and that is cost. It is about cost efficiency in the end, very often in strategy games. That goes for Warcraft 3 as well. So I suggest the cost going down. 280 gold, 80 lumber is the cost right now. I suggest 250 gold, 60 lumber. And also another problem for orcs, of course, for Taurens being a tier 3 unit is the production time. So I also suggest this one getting greatly reduced from 44 to 35 seconds. This is a big buff for Taurens production. They're still going to be, as good as they are out in the field, which is not that good. But if they're cheaper, maybe that makes them worth the investment. Certainly will make them easier to get to, which I think is a reasonable step to take. Taurens and Griffins, and as you will see, other units as well, I think deserve to see a little bit more play. All right, next up, we have Night Elf coming. And again here, I will say that I think Night Elf versus Human is a bit too Night Elf favored at the moment. First though, we're going to get to the buffs. The Priestess of the Moon has been seeing a tiny bit of play off and on in Night Elf Mirror with Potom Hunts pushes and all that. But the Potom is never playable anywhere else. Okay, there's one exception. Against Orc, super late game, tier 3, third hero, the Potom is sometimes playable. But she's hardly playable ever. So I suggest big buffs to the Potom. And specifically here, I want to target Searing Arrow. Owl Scout is also a really poorly designed spell, to be honest. And I have suggested some changes to it in the past, but it would be really complicated to implement. I don't know if it's even doable. So I'm going to stick here with something more basic. So Searing Arrow being massively buffed by decreasing the mana cost from 8 to 5, enabling you to fire more arrows, to heal better from Moonwells, to damage higher for longer, all that. And also to straight up buff the damage of the Searing Arrow from 10, 20, 30 to 12, 25, 24, 36. That's a big buff, 20% damage on each level, but it's not exactly 20% more damage on the Potom, because you have to consider, of course, the Potom also has base damage, right? So the Potom level 1 has around 25 damage, I think. Yeah. I checked it out earlier. Yeah, I think it's 25. Around 25. So you would go from 35 damage to 37 damage, which is then less than a 10% increase per right click. It's still going to be noticeable, 2 damage every shot. That adds up over time, but I don't think it would be an insane change. Or to make it more explicit, I don't think it would be a keeper change, which completely makes the hero dominant and possibly meta ruining. And also here, the Chimeras, I think, should have their build time reduced. Like so many other tier 3 units, they just take so long to build. They're too hard to get to, and for that reason, we hardly ever see them. But like the Griffins also, Griffins and Chims, we sometimes see. So I don't think they need to have their cost reduced, just their build time. All right, and now we come to the nerfs that I would suggest. This one here might be a bit confusing for some people, and I understand why. This is not very obvious. So I would like to see the resistance skin upgrade for Mountain Giants, build time, being increased from 75 to 105 seconds. This is a long upgrade then. But the reason here is, at the moment, Night Elf Mirror is absolutely dominated by bears. Bear Mirror, all the time, all day. In theory, Night Elf could have a counter to bears in Talons. Talons have great magic damage, Fairy of Fire, Cyclone, all that stuff, pretty good. But when you have the intention of going to bears, you can always easily swap into Mountain Giants. And Mountain Giants and Dryads are a great counter then to Talons. So the bear counter, Talons, doesn't really work because of Mountain Giants. And I think here it is reasonable to nerf resistance skin. This is a big nerf, honestly, especially on one base when timings are really important. In this Night Elf Mirror kind of play, Talons versus bears, MGs, it's all about one base normally. But I think it is reasonable to do that because resistance skin is almost nowhere else in the meta relevant. Unless we have a crazy long late game, macro game, either against Undead or against Human, where then there should be enough time for resistance skin. And if there isn't enough time for resistance skin, especially Undead, against Undead that's okay. Against Undead you don't need resistance skin. Against Human though, you would. But like I said, if it's a long two base macro game, I think you should have the time for this. It is, I will admit here my own bias as well. I think Bear Mirror is some of the worst meta that we've ever had, and we've had it for way too long. So part of my focus here also is to interfere, so to speak, in the Bear Mirror. I think there needs to be more alternatives. There needs to be more other ways for Night Elf to play. And with his resistance skin change, Talons will be more playable. And of course, with his Potom change, Potom would be more playable. So this is a change only for Night Elf Mirror, basically. All right, next up, this is the change that really wants to target Night Elf versus Human. And that is to reduce the healing amount of rejuvenation from 400 to 350 HP. Especially melee heroes, especially Demon Hunter, benefits a ton from this healing from Rejuve. When the Human has expanded and finally stabilized on 2 bases, the strength that Night Elf has to keep hitting with wave after wave of attack with Demon Hunter and Panda or Demon and Naga, normally it's Demon Hunter Panda, is really, really high. And it is too much sustain over time. Just on paper, the cost efficiency of Druids of the Claw bears is insanely high. Not only do they have great damage, not only do they have even more buffed damage through Roar, they also have healing. Every bear that comes out has 400 HP with which he can heal any target, especially heroes, of course, very strong. And if you wait a little bit, you even have 2 heals right away. Cost efficiency of bears is insane, and I think it's too high. Also, Night Elf in general at the moment is relying too much on the Demon Hunter. And since the Demon Hunter has so much armor and evasion, so much effective HP, he benefits the most from Rejuve, which is also why a nerf to Rejuve is more enabling the other Night Elf heroes, which can still benefit, of course, from Rejuve, but don't need the Rejuve this badly. Which is why I strongly advocate for the bears being nerfed, the Rejuve being nerfed. Bears have also been changed a lot over the years. You know, their mana was increased, then decreased. Their damage was nerfed, then buffed. I think when it comes to bears in the open field in a battle, they're of course very strong, but they're in an okay spot. They oftentimes have counters. But the way that the reinforcements work, with rejuvenation being so strong for continued assaults, continued attacks, is, in my opinion, way too good. We saw when the bears had always double rejuve, how insane that was. But now, with 1.5 rejuves, or whatever it is when they come out, I think it's still too good. I think rejuve is a crazy spell. The fact that you can heal so well and have such strong fighters, which enable your heroes so much, this is, I think, too much. And lastly, the Demon Hunter. He is the villain of the patch. A lot of people are really upset with the Demon Hunter. A lot of people want to see the Demon Hunter nerfed, especially Immolation. I agree the Demon is too strong. I don't agree with Immolation. I touched on it briefly earlier when we looked at the blue post. I think Immolation is a cool spell. I think it makes for an interesting early game. Whenever there's reason to be aggressive early, that makes the game more exciting. And also there's counterplays to it. You can wall off with towers or with farms. Also at the expansion, you can block with footmen, you can micro against it, you can buy boots against it. You know, there's counterplays available to it. Immolation is, I think, a very interesting spell. Of course, it used to be too strong. We all remember those days. But now, I think it's in a good spot. And speaking of counterplay, what there's almost no counterplay to is mana burn. And this is a double whammy. Because not only is mana burn very hard to counterplay, especially when the demon has boots, but also it is an ability that in itself homogenizes the game and takes player choice away. When the Demon Hunter is on the field, automatically you have to eliminate half of the heroes that you can pick. You wanted to go Panda second? Not anymore. You wanted to go MK second? Not anymore. You wanted to go Cryptlord or Dreadlord? Not anymore. The mana burn nullifies too many heroes. The mana burn is the problem. The mana burn has been a meta problem for many, many, many years. Immolation is strong, but it is not the driving factor of the issue in the matchup. And I almost want to say in the game. Mana burn in general is, in my opinion, a bad mechanic. But the Siphon from the Blood Mage, for example, there's counterplay to it. You can walk out of range, you can use a Zeppelin, you can do all sorts of things. But mana burn, unless you can really control the demon very effectively, there's no counter to it. And of course, most armies can't control the Demon Hunter. Which is why the mana burn range has to be reduced, in my opinion. It's 300 range right now in the mana burn. I think this has to be reduced to 250. This will help human overall in this matchup and will also, hopefully, make more heroes viable against the Demon Hunter and against the Mana Burn. Alright. And last race, Undead. Alright. In my opinion, Undead is not OP in any of the matchups, but there is one specific exception with one timing, and that is the Ghoul Frenzy timing. Against Night Elf, also against Orc, even in Undead Mirror sometimes, also against Human. The Ghoul Frenzy timing for when it hits is too strong. I'll touch on that later on. First, I'm going to mention the buffs that I would suggest. Necromancers were also targeted in the blue post, but I think going for mass summons, mass skellies is not the right way to go. I think Unholy Frenzy here has way better potential. Undead is the only race that only has one source of dispel, AoE dispel from the Destroyer. I think it would open a lot of interesting avenues of play for Undead, maybe even tier 2 play, which is normally impossible for them, if we gave the Necromancer a single target dispel. Very similar to Purge. With Purge, you target one ally or one enemy, and then it dispels first, and then it applies the slow second. Something very similar I would love to see with Unholy Frenzy. Unholy Frenzy is also something you can target on your allies or on your enemies, because of course it's a kiss curse kind of an ability. It increases attack speed, but it drains HP per second. Although I guess it would hardly ever be worth it to use on an opponent, but in theory, it is doable. And the Dispel should, however, not do too much damage to summons. This could be a strong addition for Undead, to have early Dispel against things like Hex, against things like Entangle. What else? Skellies, maybe? Although against Skellies, I guess it wouldn't be too good. But yeah, against specific debuffs especially, this could be a strong addition, which is why I think the actual Dispel to summons shouldn't be that potent with only 200 damage. Alright, next up. This is something that really needs to happen. Blizzard, please. Alright, so a quick little history lesson. Anti-Magic Shell from Banshees used to be undispellable for a long time. This was changed a couple of patches ago. Now it takes like 3 or 4 dispels from Dryads or Priest or Walkers or Shaman or whatever to dispel anti-magic. And I think that's good. Having something that's completely undispellable and uncounterable is kind of stupid. But we need to make an exception. Destroyers, mass destroyers are ruining Undead Mirror right now. Like mass bears are ruining Night Elf Mirror, mass destroyers are ruining Undead Mirror. And for that reason, we need to make Anti-Magic Shell undispellable by destroyers. And this is doable. You can do it in the world editor or whatever. You can make it so that certain types of dispel can dispel it, other types of dispel cannot. And just to demonstrate this, normally Banshees are supposed to be the counter to destroyers. They used to be. Because Anti-Magic Shell also makes it that you don't take damage from magic units, from magic damage, I mean. And Banshees were a good counter. So if somebody went mass destroyers, then you could counter that by going Banshees and Fiends. And this is the naughty thing about these new destroyers. So, like I said, anti-magic and Fiends used to be the counter to destroyers, but nowadays, not only can you dispel anti-magic, you also get mana from it. Which makes the intended counter, the AMS, suddenly the boost. And destroyers are now the counter to anti-magic shell. Exactly the wrong way around. As you can see, the destroyers now have mana. This is terrible. It's ruining Undead Mirror. And we need to change it, please. What? I just see now that there's still an overlay here. Yeah. Okay. Let's go back. And like I said, this is doable. You can make it so only certain dispels dispel AMS. If all other dispels dispel it, that's fine. But please, 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 please remove it for destroyers. And next up, Frostworms, another unit that is very, very unplayable. So here I propose a pretty significant buff to the production, decrease the gold and lumber cost by a good amount, and also decrease build time by a big amount. This is once more, because this unit and Taurens and Chims, interesting units that unfortunately we just never get to see. And yeah, I think it would be too dangerous to buff these units, especially Chims and Frostworms. If we buff them too much, they might just be too strong and you have to go for them every time. But they're just not very strong units as it is. So just decreasing the cost, making them quicker to build, should make them more attainable, if not endlessly powerful. All right, and this is the big nerf that would certainly affect the metagame a lot. Like I said, I think Frenzy Ghoul timings, the Ghoul Frenzy push is too strong. Ghoul Frenzy, the longer the game goes, can be dealt with better by the opponent. Heroes get stronger, armies get bigger, especially hero level up timings here are a big factor. Too many games end around 9 to 10 minutes. And it has a decent early game, goes for the Frenzy upgrade, runs across the map, especially against Night Elf, also against Orc. Attacks once, boom, game over. We want to disincentivize these kinds of games, where just one push, one attack decides the whole game. We want to have it back and forth. We want to have a dynamic game. For that reason, I think the research time should be increased a lot by 25 seconds, up to 70 from 45. And also, destroyers, again thinking about the destroyer mirror, the Undead mirror, destroyer mirror, but also, again thinking about timing pushes, I think the Orb of Annihilation is too strong. So, Orb of Annihilation is what it's called when the destroyer attacks with mana, then they do bonus damage and they do splash damage. Right now it's 15 bonus damage. I think this should be reduced to 10 damage. Again, I think Undead is relying too much on timing attacks, too much on one big strike to win the game outright. This makes the game, too binary. I think not interesting. So I think a nerf here on destroyers and frenzy is what Undead deserves. All right, next up, neutral heroes. This is, I think, the riskiest of all of my suggestions. So, as you guys may be able to tell, I hate magic immune units. I think they're pretty stupid, and I think they're bad for game design and bad for the meta. So I suggest that the cluster rockets from the Tinker should... how exactly is that called again? They should have ability type and damage type universal. So in Warcraft 3, there's different ability and damage types, so that, magic damage and ultimate damage, basically. So things like Death and Decay, for example, the Lich's ultimate is universal. That means that even Dryads, even Breakers would take damage from it because it's universal. It hits everything. And I think it would be really cool if the Tinker Cluster Rockets did this as well, as one of the only counters to magic immune units. There's one risk here, and the one risk is that Night Elf with the Tinker Cluster Rockets would completely destroy human with Breakers. And I will admit that that risk exists. But I think it's worth testing still, because this could absolutely shake up the meta. And if it turns out to be too crazy, we could just roll it back and go back to the previous way. But I think this could be very interesting indeed. In other games like Dota 2, we have found that if some abilities pierce magic immunity and will work through magic immunity, that makes things very interesting. And the cluster rockets, they're just a short stun and they have low damage. So it's not like suddenly you can blast magic immune units. Also, you can counter that kind of by spreading out and all that stuff. So I would love to see this change. I can understand the hesitancy on people, but I think this would be a cool idea. Firelord, also I suggest here getting buffed, because the Firelord is super trash. Perhaps the worst hero in the game right now. All of his abilities are pretty bad. And to be honest, I don't really know how to fix that. If there was only one ability that was bad, if there was one clear way to improve it, to make it balanced, that would be one thing. But they're all bad, and they all have the danger of being OP if they're too good. Lava Spawn especially. So I think I would suggest leaving the Fire Lord's abilities to be trash, but greatly increasing his agility gain from 1.6 to 3. So he would gain 3 agi on every level up, which would make him a serious right-click threat. And lastly, for the heroes, Alchemist Chemical Rage, pretty damn weak, in my opinion. At the moment, it has 15-second duration with 30-second cooldown. I would like to see this increase to 20 seconds, maybe make Chemical Rage builds more viable. And at the very, very end, I'm gonna get 2 items, and then we're gonna be done. Alright, so I'm suggesting a lot of nerfs here on the item side to make them again in line with the other items. I think it has been a very good development for Warcraft 3 to have the items be more balanced in the drop pools that they are. We see fewer matches nowadays getting decided right away by an item. For example, mana potions, not as good as they used to be. Book of the Dead, not as deadly as they used to be. Also, claws and circlets, which some players can get lucky with, not as good anymore. And I think this is a good development. Keeping items on par, I think, is the right way to go. Which is why I suggest for further nerfs to the items that I think are too good. I think Claws of Attack plus 8 are still too good. I think they should be Claws of Attack plus 7. Because right now, Claws is the best item from this camp, along with the Ring of Regen. Ring of Regen, very interesting. For many years, was never considered a good item, but nowadays, we have found out, especially for the early game, that HP regen of 2 per second is insanely good. Insanely good in the early game. Too good, clearly, in my opinion. So that should also be reduced from 2 to 1.5. Heal wards, the consumables from the biggerish camps are also super good. Even just 2 charges are super good, especially if you have the right army. 3 charges, in my opinion, way too much. We already reduced charges from some of these drops before. Wand of the Wind, for example, was reduced from 3 to 2. The Mana Stone was nerfed as well. The Book of the Dead was nerfed. I think this drop pool is in a really good spot right now, with the exception of heal wards. I think heal wards are too good and should have 1 charge reduced. Also, speaking of consumables, sentry wards. Still super good. The vision they give is insane. You get so much intel, and not only do you get the vision, but they're also invis, so your opponent is unaware what you are seeing and what you can, use as information. So I think the vision range should be greatly reduced from 1600 to 1000. Lastly, in terms of nerfs, the Khadgar's Pipe. This is the one item that dodged most of the, well, not most of the, but some of the aura nerfs. Like I said earlier, a while ago, we learned that auras are super, super good. Khadgar's Pipe, it was nerfed already. It used to be 1.75, I think. Now it's 0.5. It is by far still the best item from this camp, which I think the mana regen should be reduced further from 0.5 to 0.4. Okay, and now my last suggestion. As you saw from the Blizzard Blue post, they want to put the Circlet back into the same item drop pool as the Gloves of Haste, level 2 items. I think this is a terrible idea. Circlet then will be by far the best item in that drop pool. But I agree that level 2 items should have more than just 3 items that can drop. So I suggest adding 2 new items to drop from this camp. The first would grant 20% increased mana regen. So like a mini Sobi mask. But very important here, I think, this should not stack with multiples of this item. Because then things can get out of control. We know this already from some other items. For example, Talisman of Evasion doesn't stack with multiple talismans. Otherwise, evasion would be too crazy. And here also, imagine if you find like 3 of these items, you stack them on top of each other, that would be way too good. So if this is added, it should not be stacking with itself. If it stacks with other forms, like a Sobi mask, I think that would be okay. And also, we have bonus armor from this camp, Ring of Protection plus 4. How about we add an item that gives bonus spell resistance, like a mini Rune Bracers. Rune Bracers can be a game-changing item. It's crazy strong. 33% damage reduction, spell resistance is quite insane. So here I would suggest a smallerish one with 15% spell damage resistance. Rune bracers don't stack with each other, so I think also this they should not stack with each other. And all right, and I think that's it. Okie dokie. For everyone who's still here, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you found that somewhat informative. This was my opinion, my suggestions for the 1.36.1 patch notes. If Blizzard keeps doing it the way they did before, then either next week or in 2 weeks, they're gonna release an updated PTR version and again gather feedback. I hope they do. Boy, do I hope that they listen to the feedback this time, because a lot of this is really not a good idea, in my opinion. And, well, my opinion, like I said, isn't the only one that matters. I'm going to be very interested to see what the other people are saying. I imagine some of the streamers and stuff will also have something to say about it, but also that goes for all of you out there. If you give your opinion in the Back to Warcraft Twitch chat, then nobody from Blizzard's going to see it. And also, if you whine about the races too much, then I'm going to time you out. But on a more serious note, if you want to give suggestions, you can do so here in the comments or on Reddit or in the Blizzard forums. And yeah, Blizzard is banking on getting feedback from the community, so it's going to be a bit of a community effort from us. Hopefully, we can steer this patch, this new one, in the right direction, because yeah, I'm a bit worried what's going to go live in the end. But I'm going to hope for the best, remain an optimist as always. And I wish you all a very pleasant day. Take care. I'll see you soon on the stream. Bye-bye.